Section 12 of The Glass Slipper and Other Problems for Violet Strange. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kay Hand. The Golden Slipper and Other Problems for Violet Strange by Katharine Green. Section 12. Problem 8. The Doctor, His Wife, and the Clock. Part 3. The gentleman, whom Leonard now saw to be Mr. Stanton, an intimate friend of Dr. Zabriskie, smiled very queerly at this, and taking the doctor's arm led him back to his own auto. Leonard naturally followed them, but the doctor, hearing his steps, turned and bade him, in a very peremptory tone, to take the cars home, and then, as if on second thought, told him to go to Poughkeepsie in his stead, and explain to the people there that he was too shaken up by his misstep to do his duty, and that he would be with them next morning. This seemed strange to Leonard, but he had no reasons for disobeying his master's orders, and so rode to Poughkeepsie. But the doctor did not follow him the next day. On the contrary, he telegraphed for him to return, and when he got back, dismissed him with a month's wages. This ended Leonard's connection with the Zabriskie family. A simple story bearing out what the wife has already told us, but it furnishes a link which may prove invaluable. Mr. Stanton, whose first name is Theodore, knows the real reason why Dr. Zabriskie returned home on the night of the 17th of July, 19. Mr. Stanton, consequently, is the man to see, and this shall be my business tomorrow. Checkmate. Theodore Stanton is not in this country. Though this points him out as the man from whom Dr. Zabriskie bought the pistol, it does not facilitate my work, which is becoming more and more difficult. Mr. Stanton's whereabouts are not even known to his most intimate friends. He sailed from this country most unexpectedly on the 18th of July a year ago, which was the day after the murder of Mr. Hasbrouck. It looks like a flight, especially as he has failed to maintain open communication even with his relatives. Was he the man who shot Mr. Hasbrouck? No, but he was the man who put the pistol in Dr. Zabriskie's hand that night, and whether he did this with purpose or not, was evidently so alarmed at the catastrophe which followed that he took the first outgoing steamer to Europe. So far all is clear, but there are mysteries yet to be solved, which will require my utmost tact. What if I should seek out the gentleman with whose name that of Mrs. Zabriskie has been linked, and see if I can in any way connect him with Mr. Stanton or the events of that night? Eureka! I have discovered that Mr. Stanton cherished a mortal hatred for the gentleman above mentioned. It was a covert feeling, but no less deadly on that account, and while it never led him into any extravagances, it was of force sufficient to account for many a secret misfortune occurring to that gentleman. Now, if I can prove that he is the Mephistopheles who whispered insinuations into the ear of our blind Faust, I may strike a fact that will lead me out of this maze. But how can I approach secrets so delicate without compromising the woman I feel bound to respect if only for the devoted love she manifests for her unhappy husband? I shall have to appeal to Joe Smithers. This is something which I always hate to do, but as long as he will take money, and as long as he is fertile in resources for obtaining the truth from people I am myself unable to reach, I must make use of his cupidity and his genius. He is an honorable fellow in one way, and never retails as gossip what he acquires for our use. How will he proceed in this case, and by what tactics will he gain the very delicate information which we need? I own that I am curious to see. I shall really have to put down at length the incidents of this night. I always knew that Joe Smithers was invaluable not only to myself but to the police, but I really did not know he possessed talents of so high an order. He wrote me this morning that he has succeeded in getting Mr. T.'s promise to spend the evening with him, and advised me that if I desired to be present as well, his own servant would not be at home, and that an opener of bottles would be required. As I was very anxious to see Mr. T. with my own eyes, I accepted this invitation to play the spy, and went at the proper hour to Mr. Smithers' rooms. I found them picturesque in the extreme. Piles of books stacked here and there to the ceiling made nooks and corners which could be quite shut off by a couple of old pictures set into movable frames capable of swinging out or in at the whim or convenience of the owner. As I had use for the dark shadows cast by these pictures, I pulled them both out, and made such other arrangements as appeared likely to facilitate the purpose I had in view. Then I sat down and waited for the two gentlemen who were expected to come in together. They arrived almost immediately, whereupon I rose and played my part with all necessary discretion. While ridding Mr. T of his overcoat, I stole a look at his face. It is not a handsome one, but it boasts of a gay, devil-may-care expression, which doubtless makes it dangerous to many women, while his manners are especially attractive, and his voice the richest and most persuasive that I ever heard. I contrasted him, almost against my will, with Dr. Zabriskie, and decided that with most women the former's undoubted fascinations of speech and bearing would outweigh the latter's great beauty and mental endowments. But I doubted if they would with her. The conversation which immediately began was brilliant but desultory, for Mr. Smithers, with an airy lightness for which he is remarkable, introduced topic after topic, perhaps for the purpose of showing off Mr. T.'s versatility, and perhaps for the deeper and more sinister purpose of shaking the kaleidoscope of talk so thoroughly that the real topic which we were met to discuss should not make an undue impression on the mind of his guest. Meanwhile, 1, 2, 3 bottles passed, and I had the pleasure of seeing Joe Smithers's eye grow calmer and that of Mr. T more brilliant and more uncertain. As the last bottle was being passed, Joe cast me a meaning glance, and the real business of the evening began. I shall not attempt to relate the half-dozen failures which Joe made in endeavoring to elicit the facts we were in search of, without arousing the suspicion of his visitor. I am only going to relate the successful attempt. They had been talking now for some hours, and I, who had long before been waved aside from their immediate presence, was hiding my curiosity and growing excitement behind one of the pictures, when I suddenly heard Joe say: "He has the most remarkable memory I ever met. He can tell to a day when any notable event occurred." "Pshaw!" answered his companion, who, by the way, was known to pride himself upon his own memory for dates. "I can state where I went and what I did on every day in the year. That may not embrace what you call notable events, but the memory required is all the more remarkable, is it not?" "Pooh!" was his friend's provoking reply. "You are bluffing, Ben. I will never believe that." Mr. T, who had passed by this time into that stage of intoxication which makes persistence in an assertion a duty as well as a pleasure, threw back his head, and as the wreaths of smoke rose in airy spirals from his lips, reiterated his statement and offered to submit to any test of his vaunted powers which the other might dictate. "You keep a diary?" began Joe. "Which at the present moment is at home," completed the other. "Will you allow me to refer to it to morrow if I am suspicious of the accuracy of your recollections?" "Undoubtedly," returned the other. "Very well, then, I will wager you a cool 50 that you cannot tell where you were between the hours of 10 and 11 on a certain night which I will name." "Done!" cried the other, bringing out his pocket book and laying it on the table before him. Joe followed his example and then summoned me. "Write a date down here," he commanded, pushing a piece of paper towards me, with a look keen as the flash of a blade. "Any date, man," he added, as I appeared to hesitate in the embarrassment I thought natural under the circumstances. "Put down day, month, and year, only don't go too far back, not farther than 2 years." Smiling with the air of a flunkey admitted to the sports of his superiors, I wrote a line and laid it before Mr. Smithers, who at once pushed it with a careless gesture towards his companion. "You can, of course, guess the date I made use of. July 17th, 19—" Mr. T, who had evidently looked upon this matter as mere play, flushed scarlet as he read these words, and for one instant looked as if he had rather fly the house than answer Joe Smithers's nonchalant glance of inquiry. "I have given my word and will keep it," he said at last, but with a look in my direction that sent me reluctantly back to my retreat. "I don't suppose you want names," he went on. "That is, if anything I have to tell is of a delicate nature." "Oh, no," answered the other. "Only facts and places." "I don't think places are necessary either," he returned. "I will tell you what I did, and that must serve you. I did not promise to give number and street." "Well, well," Joe exclaimed. "Earn your 50, that is all. Show that you remember where you were on the night of—" and with an admirable show of indifference he pretended to consult the paper between them, "the 17th of July, 2 years ago, and I shall be satisfied." "I was at the club, for one thing," said Mr. T. "Then I went to see a lady friend, where I stayed until 11. She wore a blue muslin." "What is that?" I had betrayed myself by a quick movement which sent a glass tumbler crashing to the floor. Zulma Zabriskie had worn a blue muslin on that same night. You will find it noted in the report given me by the policeman who saw her on the balcony. "That noise?" It was Joe who was speaking. "You don't know rheumate as well as I do, or you wouldn't ask. It is his practice, I am sorry to say, to accentuate his pleasure in draining my bottles by dropping a glass at every third one." Mr. T. went on. "She was a married woman, and I thought she loved me, but—and this is the greatest proof I can offer you that I am giving you a true account of that night—she had not the slightest idea of the extent of my passion, and only consented to see me at all because she thought, poor thing, that a word from her would set me straight, and rid her of attentions she evidently failed to appreciate. A sorry figure for a fellow like me to cut, but you caught me on the most detestable date in my calendar, and—" There he ceased to be interesting, and I was anxious. The secret of a crime for which there seemed to be no reasonable explanation is no longer a mystery to me. I have but to warn Miss Strange. He had got thus far when a sound in the room behind him led him to look up. A lady had entered, a lady heavily veiled and trembling with what appeared to be an intense excitement. He thought he knew the figure, but the person, whoever it was, stood so still and remained so silent he hesitated to address her, which seeing, she pushed up her veil and all doubt vanished. It was Violet herself. In disregard of her usual practice she had come alone to the office. This meant urgency of some kind. Had she too sounded this mystery? No, or her aspect would not have worn this look of triumph. What had happened then? He made an instant endeavor to find out. "You have news," he quietly remarked. "Good news, I should judge, by your very cheery smile." "Yes, I think I have found the way of bringing Dr. Zabriskie to himself." Astonished beyond measure, so little did these words harmonize with the impressions and conclusions at which he had just arrived, something very like doubt spoke in his voice as he answered with the simple exclamation, "You do?" "Yes. He is obsessed by a fixed idea, and must be given an opportunity to test the truth of that idea. The shock of finding it a false one may restore him to his normal condition. He believes that he shot Mr. Hasbrouck with no other guidance than his sense of hearing. Now, if it can be proved that his hearing is an insufficient guide for such an act, as of course it is, the shock of the discovery may clear his brain of its cobwebs. Mrs. Zabriskie thinks so, and the police—" "What's that? The police?" "Yes, Dr. Zabriskie would be taken before them again this morning. No entreaties on the part of his wife would prevail. He insisted upon his guilt, and asked her to accompany him there, and the poor woman found herself forced to go. Of course he encountered again the same division of opinion among the men he talked with. 3 out of the 4 judged him insane, which observing, he betrayed great agitation and reiterated his former wish to be allowed an opportunity to prove his sanity by showing his skill in shooting. This made an impression, and a disposition was shown to grant his request then and there. But Mrs. Zabriskie would not listen to this. She approved of the experiment, but begged that it might be deferred till another day and then take place in some spot remote from the city. For some reason they heeded her, and she has just telephoned me that this attempt of his is to take place tomorrow in the New Jersey woods. I am sorry that this should have been put through without you, and when I tell you that the idea originated with me, that from some word I purposely let fall one day, they both conceived of this plan of ending the uncertainty that was devouring their lives, you will understand my excitement and the need I have of your support. Tell me that I have done well. Do not show me such a face. You frighten me." "I do not wish to frighten you. I merely wish to know just who are going on this expedition." "Some members of the police, Dr. Zabriskie, his wife, and myself. She begged." "You must not go." "Why? The affair is to be kept secret. The doctor will shoot—fail—" "Oh!" she suddenly broke in, alarmed by his expression. "You think he will not fail." "I think that you had better heed my advice and stay out of it. The affair is now in the hands of the police, and your place is anywhere but where they are." "But I go as her particular friend. They have given her the privilege of taking with her one of her own sex, and she has chosen me. I shall not fail her. Father is away, and if the awful disappointment you suggest awaits her, there is all the more reason why she should have some sympathetic support." This was true. that the fresh protest he was about to utter died on his lips. Instead, he simply remarked as he bowed her out, "I foresee that we shall not work much longer together. You are nearing the end of your endurance." He never forgot the smile she threw back at him. 5. There are some events which impress the human mind so deeply that their memory mingles with all after experiences. Though Violet had made it a rule to forget as soon as possible the tragic episodes incident to the strange career upon which she had so mysteriously embarked, there was destined to be one scene, if not more, which she has never been able to dismiss at will. This was the sight which met her eyes from the bow of the small boat in which Dr. Zabriskie and his wife were rowed over to Jersey on the afternoon which saw the end of this most somber drama. Though it was by no means late in the day, the sun was already sinking, and the bright red glare which filled the west and shone full upon the faces of the half dozen people before her added much to the tragic nature of the scene, though she was far from comprehending its full significance. The doctor sat with his wife in the stern, and it was upon their faces Violet's glance was fixed. The glare shone luridly on his sightless eyeballs, and as she noticed his unwinking lids, she realized as never before what it was to be blind in the midst of sunshine. His wife's eyes, on the contrary, were lowered, but there was a look of hopeless misery in her colorless face which made her appearance infinitely pathetic, and Violet felt confident that if he could only have seen her he would not have maintained the cold and unresponsive manner which chilled the words on his poor wife's lips and made all advance on her part impossible. On the seat in front of them sat an inspector, and from some quarter, possibly from under the inspector's coat, there came the monotonous ticking of the small clock, which was to serve as a target for the blind man's aim. This ticking was all Violet heard, though the river was alive with traffic, and large and small boats were steaming by them on every side. I am sure that it was all that Mrs. Zabriskie heard also, as with hand pressed to her heart, and eyes fixed on the opposite shore, she waited for the event which was to determine whether the man she loved was a criminal, or only a being afflicted of God and worthy of her unceasing care and devotion. As the sun cast its last scarlet gleam over the water, the boat grounded, and Violet was enabled to have one passing word with Mrs. Zabriskie. She hardly knew what she said, but the look she received in return was like that of a frightened child. But there was always to be seen in Mrs. Zabriskie's countenance this characteristic blending of the severe and the childlike, and beyond an added pang of pity for this beautiful but afflicted woman, Violet let the moment pass without giving it the weight it perhaps demanded. "The doctor and his wife had a long talk last night," was whispered in her ear as she wound her way with the rest into the heart of the woods. With a start she turned and perceived her employer following close behind her. He had come by another boat. "But it did not seem to heal whatever breach lies between them," he proceeded. Then in a quick, anxious tone he whispered, "Whatever happens, do not lift your veil. I thought I saw a reporter skulking in the rear." "I will be careful," Violet assured him, and could say no more, as they had already reached the ground which had been selected for this trial at arms, and the various members of the party were being placed in their several positions. The doctor, to whom light and darkness were alike, stood with his face toward the western glow, and at his side were grouped the inspector and the two physicians. On the arm of one of the latter hung Dr. Zabriskie's overcoat, which he had taken off as soon as he reached the field. Mrs. Zabriskie stood at the other end of the opening near a tall stump, upon which it had been decided that the clock should be placed when the moment came for the doctor to show his skill. She had been accorded the privilege of setting this clock on the stump, and Violet saw it shining in her hand as she paused for a moment to glance back at the circle of gentlemen who were awaiting her movements. The hands of the clock stood at 5 minutes to 5, though Violet scarcely noted it at the time, for Mrs. Zabriskie was passing her and had stopped to say, "If he is not himself, he cannot be trusted. Watch him carefully and see that he does no mischief to himself or others. Ask one of the inspectors to stand at his right hand and stop him if he does not handle his pistol properly." Violet promised, and she passed on, setting the clock upon the stump and immediately drawing back to a suitable distance at the right, where she stood, wrapped in her long dark cloak. Her face shone ghastly white, even in its environment of snow-covered boughs, and noting this, Violet wished the minutes fewer between the present moment and the hour of 5 at which time he was to draw the trigger. "Dr. Zabriskie," quoth the inspector, "we have endeavored to make this trial a perfectly fair one. You are to have a shot at a small clock which has been placed within a suitable distance, and which you are expected to hit, guided only by the sound which it will make in striking the hour of 5. Are you satisfied with the arrangement?" "Perfectly. Where is my wife?" "On the other side of the field, some 10 paces from the stump upon which the clock is fixed." He bowed, and his face showed satisfaction. "May I expect the clock to strike soon?" "In less than 5 minutes," was the answer. "Then let me have the pistol. I wish to become acquainted with its size and weight." We glanced at each other, then across at her. She made a gesture. It was one of acquiescence. Immediately the inspector placed the weapon in the blind man's hand. It was at once apparent that he understood the instrument, and Violet's hopes, which had been strong up to this moment, sank at his air of confidence. "Thank God I am blind this hour and cannot see her," fell from his lips. Then, before the echo of these words had died away, he raised his voice and observed calmly enough, considering that he was about to prove himself a criminal in order to save himself from being thought a madman: "Let no one move. I must have my ears free for catching the first stroke of the clock." And he raised the pistol before him. There was a moment of torturing suspense and deep, unbroken silence. Violet's eyes were on him, so she did not watch the clock, but she was suddenly moved by some irresistible impulse to note how Mrs. Zabriskie was bearing herself at this critical moment, and casting a hurried glance in her direction, she perceived her tall figure swaying from side to side as if under an intolerable strain of feeling. Her eyes were on the clock, the hands of which seemed to creep with snail-like pace along the dial, when unexpectedly, and a full minute before the minute hand had reached the stroke of 5, Violet caught a movement on her part, saw the flash of something round and white show for an instant against the darkness of her cloak, and was about to shriek warning to the doctor, when the shrill, quick stroke of a clock rang out on the frosty air, followed by the ping and flash of a pistol. A sound of shattered glass, followed by a suppressed cry, told the bystanders that the bullet had struck the mark. But before anyone could move, or they could rid their eyes of the smoke which the wind had blown into their faces, there came another sound which made their hair stand on end and sent the blood back in terror to their hearts. Another clock was striking, which they now perceived was still standing upright on the stump where Mrs. Zabriskie had placed it. Whence came the clock, then, which had struck before the time and been shattered for its pains? One quick look told them. On the ground, 10 paces to the right, lay Zulma Zabriskie, a broken clock at her side, and in her breast a bullet which was fast sapping the life from her sweet eyes. They had to tell him, there was such pleading in her looks, and never will any of the hearers forget the scream which rang from his lips as he realized the truth. Breaking from their midst, he rushed forward and fell at her feet as if guided by some supernatural instinct. "Zulma," he shrieked, "what is this? Were not my hands dyed deep enough in blood that you should make me answerable for your life also?" Her eyes were closed, but she opened them. Looking long and steadily at his agonized face, she faltered forth: "It is not you who have killed me, it is your crime. Had you been innocent of Mr. Hasbrouck's death, your bullet would never have found my heart. Did you think I could survive the proof that you had killed that good man? I did it unwittingly. I—" "Hush!" she commanded with an awful look, which happily he could not see. "I had another motive. I wished to prove to you, even at the cost of my life, that I loved you, had always loved you, and not—" It was now his turn to silence her. His hand crept to her lips, and his despairing face turned itself blindly towards those about them. "Go," he cried, "leave us. Let me take a last farewell of my dying wife, without listeners or spectators." Consulting the eye of her employer, who stood close beside her, and seeing no hope in it, Violet fell slowly back. The others followed, and the doctor was left alone with his wife. From the distant position they took, they saw her arms creep round his neck, saw her head fall confidingly on his breast; then silence settled upon them and upon all nature, the gathering twilight deepening, till the last glow disappeared from the heavens above and from the circle of leafless trees which enclosed this tragedy from the outside world. But at last there came a stir, and Dr. Zabriskie, rising up before them with the dead body of his wife held closely to his breast, confronted them with a countenance so rapturous that he looked like a man transfigured. "I will carry her to the boat," said he. "Not another hand shall touch her. She was my true wife, my true wife." And he towered into an attitude of such dignity and passion that for a moment he took on heroic proportions, and they forgot that he had just proved himself to have committed a cold-blooded and ghastly crime. The stars were shining when the party again took their seats in the boat, and if the scene of their crossing to Jersey was impressive, what shall be said of the return? The doctor, as before, sat in the stern, an awesome figure, upon which the moon shone with a white radiance that seemed to lift his face out of the surrounding darkness and set it like an image of frozen horror before their eyes. Against his breast he held the form of his dead wife, and now and then Violet saw him stoop as if he were listening for some token of life from her set lips. Then he would lift himself again with hopelessness stamped upon his features, only to lean forward in renewed hope that was again destined to be disappointment. Violet had been so overcome by this tragic end to all her hopes, that her employer had been allowed to enter the boat with her. Seated at her side in the seat directly in front of the doctor, he watched with her these simple tokens of a breaking heart, saying nothing till they reached midstream, when, true to his instincts for all his awe and compassion, he suddenly bent towards him and said: "Dr. Zabriskie, the mystery of your crime is no longer a mystery to me. Listen and see if I do not understand your temptation, and how you, a conscientious and God-fearing man, came to slay your innocent neighbor. A friend of yours, or so he called himself, had for a long time filled your ears with tales tending to make you suspicious of your wife and jealous of a certain man whom I will not name. You knew that your friend had a grudge against this man, and so for many months turned a deaf ear to his insinuations. But finally some change which you detected in your wife's bearing or conversation roused your own suspicions, and you began to doubt her truth and to curse your blindness, which in a measure rendered you helpless. The jealous fever grew and had risen to a high point when one night, a memorable night, this friend met you just as you were leaving town, and with cruel craft whispered in your ear that the man you hated was even then with your wife, and that if you would return at once to your home you would find him in her company. The demon that lurks at the heart of all men, good or bad, thereupon took complete possession of you, and you answered this false friend by saying that you would not return without a pistol. Whereupon he offered to take you to his house and give you his. You consented, and getting rid of your servant by sending him to Poughkeepsie with your excuses, you entered your friend's automobile. You say you bought the pistol, and perhaps you did, but however that may be, you left his house with it in your pocket, and declining companionship, walked home, arriving at the Colonnade a little before midnight. Ordinarily you have no difficulty in recognizing your own doorstep, but, being in a heated frame of mind, you walked faster than usual, and so passed your own house and stopped at that of Mr. Hasbrouck, one door beyond. As the entrances of these houses are all alike, there was but one way by which you could have made yourself sure that you had reached your own dwelling, and that was by feeling for the doctor's sign at the side of the door. But you never thought of that. Absorbed in dreams of vengeance, your sole impulse was to enter by the quickest means possible. Taking out your night key, you thrust it into the lock. It fitted, but it took strength to turn it, so much strength that the key was twisted and bent by the effort. But this incident, which would have attracted your attention at another time, was lost upon you at this moment. An entrance had been effected, and you were in too excited a frame of mind to notice at what cost, or to detect the small differences apparent in the atmosphere and furnishings of the two houses, trifles which would have arrested your attention under other circumstances, and made you pause before the upper floor had been reached. It was while going up the stairs that you took out your pistol, so that by the time you arrived at the front room door you held it already drawn and cocked in your hand. For, being blind, you feared escape on the part of your victim, and so waited for nothing but the sound of a man's voice before firing. When, therefore, the unfortunate Mr. Hasbrouck, roused by this sudden intrusion, advanced with an exclamation of astonishment, you pulled the trigger and killed him on the spot. It must have been immediately upon his fall that you recognized from some word he uttered, or from some contact you may have had with your surroundings, that you were in the wrong house and had killed the wrong man, for you cried out in evident remorse, "God, what have I done?" and fled without approaching your victim. Descending the stairs, you rushed from the house, closing the front door behind you, and regaining your own without being seen. But here you found yourself baffled in your attempted escape by two things. First, by the pistol you still held in your hand, and secondly, by the fact that the key upon which you depended for entering your own door was so twisted out of shape that you knew it would be useless for you to attempt to use it. What did you do in this emergency? You have already told us. Though the story seemed so improbable at the time, you found nobody to believe it but myself. The pistol you flung far away from you down the pavement, from which, by one of those rare chances which sometimes happens in this world, it was presently picked up by some late passer-by of more or less doubtful character. The door offered less of an obstacle than you had anticipated, for when you turned again you found it, if I am not greatly mistaken, ajar, left so, as we have reason to believe, by one who had gone out of it but a few minutes before in a state which left him but little master of his actions. It was this fact which provided you with an answer when you were asked how you succeeded in getting into Mr. Hasbrouck's house after the family had retired for the night. Astonished at the coincidence, but hailing with gladness the deliverance which it offered, you went in and ascended at once into your wife's presence, and it was from her lips, and not from those of Mrs. Hasbrouck, that the cry arose which startled the neighborhood and prepared men's minds for the tragic words which were shouted a moment later from the next house. But she who uttered the scream knew of no tragedy save that which was taking place in her own breast. She had just repulsed a dastardly suitor, and seeing you enter so unexpectedly in a state of unaccountable horror and agitation, was naturally stricken with dismay, and thought she saw your ghost, or what was worse, a possible avenger. While you, having failed to kill the man you sought, and having killed a man you esteemed, let no surprise on her part lure you into any dangerous self-betrayal. You strove instead to soothe her, and even attempted to explain the excitement under which you labored, by an account of your narrow escape at the station, till the sudden alarm from next door distracted her attention, and sent both your thoughts and hers in a different direction. Not till the conscience had fully awakened and the horror of your act had had time to tell upon your sensitive nature, did you breathe forth those vague confessions, which, not being supported by the only explanations which would have made them credible, led her, as well as the police, to consider you affected in your mind. Your pride as a man and your consideration for her as a woman kept you silent, but did not keep the worm from preying upon your heart. Am I not correct in my surmises, Dr. Zabriskie, and is not this the true explanation of your crime?" With a strange look he lifted up his face. "Hush," said he, "you will waken her. See how peacefully she sleeps. I should not like to have her wakened now, she is so tired, and I have not watched over her as I should." Appalled at his gesture, his look, his tone, Violet drew back, and for a few minutes no sound was to be heard but the steady dip, dip of the oars and the lap, lap of the waters against the boat. Then there came a quick uprising, the swaying before her of something dark and tall and threatening, and before she could speak or move or even stretch forth her hands to stay him, the seat before her was empty, and darkness had filled the place where but an instant previous he had sat, a fearsome figure, erect and rigid as a sphinx. What little moonlight there was only served to show a few rising bubbles, marking the spot where the unfortunate man had sunk with his much-loved burden. As the widening circles fled farther and farther out, the tide drifted the boat away, and the spot was lost which had seen the termination of one of earth's saddest tragedies. End of Problem 8.